All right, hello. So first, thanks everybody for being here. This program has been awesome. I mean, far beyond anything that I think John or I really could have expected. And of course, when you start seeing things come together, it's just so awesome and just makes all the work that we do just worth it. So who am I? I am Kendra Neilsen Myles. I am the executive director and founder of EDS Wellness, which is the organization that is also putting together this program. So I'm going to talk about business and social guidelines. All right, and this is more just about who I am. I am a certified health education specialist. My degree was in public health. I'm a board certified patient advocate. I'm a yoga instructor, and I just recently finished my restorative exercise certification. I run EDS Wellness. I'm the executive director and founder. I also have 2 small businesses. I've published, you can read the slides. I've done other things like pharmaceutical and medical sales. I've been in the medical world since before I actually graduated college, and this is all I've ever done, to be honest, and it's just been a natural evolution. I am married. I've been married for almost 17 years. We started dating after high school. We have 3 hypermobile kids and 2 Alaskan Klee Kai puppies, which are miniature huskies, if anybody wants to know. And they're called Elsa and Mush, and they have a Facebook page, or an Instagram account. And my favorite place is the beach with my family. So again, I'm talking about business and social guidelines, the business side of giving back. It's important things you need to know, a few things you may not need to know, and some things that you will never need to know. However, I think after all of these presentations, this is a natural progression to this presentation. Again, my name is Kendra. I'm the executive director and founder. And so objectives are to define what is a support group. We've already talked about that, but I'll give my own definition. The types of support groups and the importance. Discuss critical business considerations, and I say business with quotation marks because a lot of support groups don't necessarily think of themselves as a business. And you might not. It might not apply to you. However, there are some just things to consider because in a lot of ways, different things that we've already discussed really do kind of apply to very similar business things. And I can tell you in talking to everybody here, a lot of what support group leaders go through is so similar to what we go through when you're running a nonprofit. And you know, a nonprofit is a support group in its own way too. So we're gonna go establish best practices for professional conduct, relationships and collaboration. We're gonna reiterate the importance of personal and professional barriers, which we've all talked about a lot today, including how important self-care is and for support group leaders. And we're gonna outline the key steps and best practices when going into the business side of giving back, whether you're starting a support group or maybe you wanna eventually go nonprofit. So we can discuss that a little bit further. I will say that this presentation has been redone a million times, and this information is a lot. It's in depth. There will be a lot of information and content that we won't really read, but it was done that way because this was supposed to be a resource online so that if you wanted to refer to it, you wanted to find the links, you wanted to kind of understand why I brought something up and the context behind it, that's why it's there. It's meant to be a resource. I don't know that there's ever any perfect way to really give this information, but we're just gonna go through it. So the definition of a support group. What is a support group? A group of people with common experiences or concerns who provide each other with encouragement, comfort, and advice. We've already defined support group in other ways, so this is the way that I was defining it, and this also could pertain to nonprofits and why we're all here. So why are support groups important? Living with chronic pain is one of the hardest things that we do on a daily basis. Living with chronic pain while also coping with multisystemic conditions, such as the ones that we've discussed today, all hypermobility related disorders, often goes hand in hand with challenges in gaining updated and reputable medical information or locating knowledgeable providers. Additionally, individuals often are looking for ongoing support, including needs-specific help, finding solutions, and general connection to others who understand. Some of the best approaches for managing life are life hacks. You know, there's a group that does that, just these life hacks to how to get through, how to live well, how to just deal. Things we can use at home to help yourself when needed, tips for behavior modification strategies, lifestyle changes that help restore function and live well, and to establish a support network. This is how support groups can and help and why they are so important, and that's why we're here. So the types of support groups are in person. They're also going to be virtual, Facebook, like we've already discussed. There's different platforms. There's also like forums on websites. Those are support groups in many ways too. There's also app and website-based communities that we talked about Inspira, but there's like Backpack Health. A lot of these health-related apps and websites also are building their own communities. Some providers also want to provide their own support groups for their patients. So there's also meetups and specific interest events and classes and seminars that also go on, and some are related to the bigger organizations or not, or they're an extension of the support group. Support group related events that we just named that. There's also nonprofit organizations. Again, they are a support group. There's also professional networks and organizations that are outside of the chronic illness world, but essentially they are a support group as well. Anything else, there's other things that are just, it's constantly evolving, especially with the world that we live in the virtual world. So getting started, this is an overview, mission and vision, support group team, your ground rules and structure. This is just what we're going to go over and touch on. Related events, materials needed, costs, budget, affiliation, autonomy, accessibility and communication, privacy and confidentiality, responsible advocacy and professional partnerships and relationships, which is really big, especially when we're working with providers, insurance and legal considerations, self-care boundaries, and what to do now, and if you want to start a support group. And then I've provided a lot of links that we won't go through, but it's just resources for you if you want to look for insurance or if you want to look at different citations that I've used in this presentation. So establishing a leadership team, barriers and referral network. What type of help do you need? These are just some things to think about when you're even getting started. So what type of help do you need? What type of help will your group provide or not? Again, it goes back to your barriers. Your support group leadership team, we've talked about that a lot today. If you're starting a nonprofit, who's going to be on your board of directors? This is really critical because a nonprofit is a business. It does have to have profit, it has to be successful. And in the public health world, when they talk about starting a board, you want to make sure your board is diverse. It's not necessarily totally filled with everybody that has your condition, because we all are sick, we don't feel well. So you want to have diverse board that provides different business areas, different strengths, and brings it to the table, but that can help sustain the organization when somebody's not doing well or isn't feeling well. That's just a good broad business strategy. That's also a great way to just think about your leadership team for a support group too. Like somebody mentioned, if you have your co-leader that's not necessarily has your condition, that's so important to help you keep going, just all around. Professional conduct. Go back to establish a referral network for areas of help and expertise that you don't necessarily support or provide. So if you are doing something and you know what your barriers are, you know what you're going to provide, what you're not going to provide, but making sure that you have that referral network together so that you can provide those resources to your members when they need it. That's really critical so that it doesn't all still fall on you, but that you know exactly where to send them. Professional conduct. This is a huge one for me, and including legal stuff, but professional conduct is paramount. We're doing a leadership program right now. We need to lead by example, but that includes support group leaders. We need to think about our professional conduct. How are we going to act? We've all talked about this several times today, but this is really, really important. We set the standard and tone for behavior, and that also goes along with your ground rules in terms of what you're going to accept, what you're not going to accept, how you're going to handle behavior, when to kick somebody out if you need to. This is all really important, and if you just establish this level of professional conduct and ground rules up front, that's it. And then you just kind of establish it. And especially when you're dealing with providers. The professional conduct when dealing with providers and other nonprofit groups or working with nonprofit groups or other support groups is so important. You set the stone, you set the tone, and you set the vibe and the culture that will eventually be created and cultivated. I think that's so critical. Collaboration is key, positivity is key, and support is key. Underlying culture, positivity, acceptance, and self-care for all. So it goes back to what we just said. Support group and nonprofit related events, we just talked about, like what are some events that are an extension of a support group or could be related. There's social things or needs specific for comorbid conditions. Interest-based, like I like to walk. I would love to walk with people a lot if they want to come. That doesn't mean it's actually a support group thing, but these need-specific things might be walking Wednesdays or something like that. Parenting groups, career groups, kids and teens, we've already gone over that, fundraising and charity, specific things, and events. And there's also regular local meetup events, anything else. These are all extensions of either, they could be a support group related event, or they could be their own type of support group in many ways. Fundraising, funding and fundraising. It all costs money, right? And you're a support group. So a lot of people make the mistake thinking, oh, well, I can just fundraise. Well, that gets a little dicey. So let's think about it. So what are the costs? You have to think about what the costs are. Do you need insurance? Does the space require a fee? The material costs. Not everything can be donated. And even if it's donated up front, there might come a time where it's not donated anymore. Then how are you going to cover those costs? There are always inherent costs. Equipment rental if you need it. Guest speaker fees. Maybe they require a fee, or maybe you want to give them a thank you card or a gift, even a $25 gift certificate for coming out, right? Maybe they need equipment. How are you going to pay for it? Is it going to be self-funded by the members? Are you going to do donations? What are donations? Can you donate to a support group? Sure they can, as long as they understand the tax and legal implications too, which we'll go over. Partnerships, there are partnerships with different organizations that you can do to help, but what are the conflicts? What are there potential conflicts of interest? What do you have to think about? What does it mean? What does a partnership really mean? What are they expecting from you? And does it provide any kind of issues for your members? You have to also think about that, it's really important. Storage, content, member information. If you're storing things online, is it private? After a certain point, if you have recorded media, there's only a certain amount that it limits, and then it starts costing. You have to, it all costs something. Even if you have an external hard drive, you still have to buy that. Or you have to put it online, and like I said, you have to subscribe to storage. At some point, there is inherent cost, and it does cost money to keep up with the material and the information to kind of help things go. And then also using if you're working with a nonprofit or not, but just because you're a support group and you're supporting a condition that's related to a large organization, can you just use that 501c3 to get donations for your support group? No, you can't just do that. So just because you're supporting a condition and your intent is good and you're providing a service and you're helping people, you can't just use the tax ID and say that you're, support my support group and donate to our cause. Because if there's no affiliation under that nonprofit, you can't just do that. Plus, there's no accountability for that money. Where is it going? Anything more? All right, so nonprofit affiliations. So this goes back to how are you funding? Can you get funding? Why would you want to affiliate with a nonprofit? Now, we've all talked about several organizations here. I am not going into any of them. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just thinking this is things to consider. So there are some support groups that are affiliations with nonprofits, and that might be a really good thing. So possible types of affiliations are nonprofit support groups. There's also chapters. I will tell you that a chapter of a support group in the legal and insurance world is different than a support group in terms of terms. A lot of times a chapter is its own entity, an extension of the larger one, but it kind of incorporates as its own thing. It's not just a support group. So we'll go into that a little bit more, but sometimes the terms that are used are important to understand and what they mean, and in the business world, even if you're not a business. That's why the business side of things is really important to understand, because the terms are important. Fiscal sponsorships. Sometimes a nonprofit can get started as a fiscal sponsorship, but what does that really mean? A lot of times that means that that nonprofit, or if you're going to do it that way, that your intent is to become a 501c3 organization. So if your intent is not to become a 501c3, fiscal sponsorship really doesn't apply, but it is a type of an affiliation. You also have to be incorporated in the state as a corporation, whatever state you're in first. So what are the benefits of affiliation? Do they provide you insurance? Support group insurance. Some people look at me like, what is that? Why would I need that? But there is a type of insurance, which we'll go over, called social services. And some organizations, if you're affiliated with them, do provide insurance that covers the volunteers that are running their support group. And and the support group essentially to exist. And that's kind of general liability and social services, which will go into the different types of insurance in just a minute. But so do they provide insurance? That might be a really good benefit for you, personally and professionally and for your members. And again, we talked back about self-care is really important, boundaries, and protecting your members from themselves. This is where insurance can really be a big deal. Speaker funding, do they give you stipends to have speakers come in? That could be a benefit too. Some do, some don't. Everybody's different. They don't have to do anything, but that might be something to consider in terms of affiliation. It might not be much, but it might be, they pays for that $25 gift card to say thank you. Because when these providers are devoting their time, not to mention their careers, to helping our organizations and our people and diagnosis and care, it's kind of thankless in many ways. It's tough, and they devote their time. They come out on their own expense. Just giving them just a thank you card and maybe a $25 gift card goes a long way. They might provide you educational materials. I mean, of course, a lot of us that run organizations are willing and want to help provide a lot of things, but printing these is a huge cost. So if an organization, if you're affiliated, they might provide you the actual printed material, and they can send you some brochures. Some can, some can't. Some might provide you something that you can print on your own, but again, it's a cost. Who's going to pay for that, and how are you going to do that? It might provide umbrella support in just some terms of being part of a larger organization and whatever connections they have. Conflicts of interest, possible issues might be the discussion of multiple conditions. We've all talked a lot about how there's a lot of comorbid conditions. If you are affiliated with a support or a nonprofit, their legal constraints and insurance might prevent you from discussing other conditions that are related to the one condition that they focus on, if that makes sense. It seems kind of, why would that happen? But it does, because they're governed by something that many people don't understand until they're in it. And that's based upon legal and insurance and different things, and everybody's a little bit different, and everybody runs their nonprofit or their business or their support group differently, and that's your right and autonomy. But if you are going to be affiliated or under a nonprofit officially, what does that really mean? And what restrictions are there for you? And does that really help or not, or restrict your mission and vision for your support group? And how do you feel about that? It might be the benefit might outweigh the restriction. I don't know. That's something that people have to consider. And in restricting, we went over that. Maintaining autonomy. If you want to maintain autonomy, you're like, okay, I'm not going to affiliate. I want to be able to do what I want to do and kind of grow and just see where things go. Like Amanda was saying during her presentation, if you're doing advocacy, we've talked a lot about the different groups here, that how much they just grow and evolve, whether they're on Facebook or in person, and all these different things that come up, and you just want to let it go as it whiz. Plus, you don't know really exactly how much you can give into it. You just want to just see how things go. So you can talk about overlapping conditions. You don't have any restrictions. There's overlap of interest, meaning like you don't have to be specific to just support groups. You can have and do these kind of related events without kind of thinking of other restrictions that you might have that are that might be prohibitive if you're under a nonprofit based upon what they're governed by. It's member controlled and owned, essentially, and then go back to refer to business considerations that we just talked about. Support group and nonprofit communication. So this is really, really important. How are you going to communicate? What are the things that you have to think about? Email lists. How are you going to do that? Does everybody want their email? I know everybody's like seen those emails where you get them and like there's like 200 emails BCC'd or CC'd on them. Some people don't want that. Some people don't want to see all those things. They don't want to get all the replies. So knowing how people want to be, how you're going to communicate, and the preferences of your members is really, really important. They might be okay. Of course, they see Susie in the group, but they don't want to know. They don't want everybody to have their personal email. So while they might see them in a group, they might not want to be, have their email out there publicly in any way. So just knowing how people want to communicate, and also the ways to communicate. How are you going to communicate? There's a lot of different ways to communicate. There are the group lists, like I just said. Do you have a website? Are you going to do a website? How much does that cost? And what information are you going to put on there? Are you going to have a Facebook page or other social platforms to connect with your members or grow or raise awareness or whatever you're going to do that meets your mission and vision? And is that a problem? Is it more work? Who's going to do that? That's a lot of upkeep as you grow. All the things that we've been talking about. Again, Facebook's groups and other social group platforms. There's also virtual and meeting options. Are you gonna, if you're an in-person group, are you going to offer virtual meeting attendance, essentially, which is what we're doing here? We're offering live streaming. So do you wanna provide essentially live attendance in a more private aspect, and how are you gonna do that, and how can you do that, and what are the privacy considerations for those that are there? How are you gonna do that? I think being able to attend a virtual meeting of a local support group is awesome. But there are considerations to think about, and there are ways to do it privately. It doesn't always have to be public, but there are things to think about. Member privacy and confidentiality. You think about member contact and questionnaire. What kind of forms and documents do you need? What kind of personal information? Do you need emergency contact information? If a medical issue happens during a meeting, you need to know who to contact. So you need to gather that information, but how are you going to do that, and where are you going to keep it? It again goes back to the storage online. A lot of articles talk about like a binder. It's similar to when you're starting a nonprofit, you put a nonprofit binder together, which is really important, but it's similar for a support group. Do you have a binder? Do you have all that information in a binder? Or do you also store it virtually, and where is that going to be? Storage and organization. Group confidentiality statement. We've talked about confidentiality and privacy, but do you have everybody sign something like that, that just has a statement, I agree to this. This is also our policy in our group. Do you agree or not agree? That might be really important. It might be really useful if something comes up. Just, it's like the privacy policies you see online. Maybe you provide that in a printed document to your members. Do you have them agree to it? I don't know what the right answer is, but those are just things to consider. Along that line is also thinking about privacy in online social platforms and venues, i.e. Facebook. It's different than something that's in public. Again, I can't say either way, these are things to consider. Participant and member agreement and waiver. This is different than the confidentiality statement. This is more of just, I'm here on my own free will, and just kind of mitigating your risk, your personal risk. What is that risk? We don't want to ever think about that, but it is something to consider. So just having everybody kind of agree that we're on here on their own free will, and just, they're participating, and, they understand that you're here as a volunteer, and that, basically a participant member waiver. It's also really important because it oftentimes includes photo and video releases. So we talk about the recordings, where you're going to put that if you do record it. But if you do provide virtual meetings, are you recording it? And do people want to be in it or not? Do they want to see support group pictures online or not? You can't just assume, right? So asking their permission and also what their preferences are is really important. Meeting and other miscellaneous related recordings, we just went over that because you have to think about personal information and what the speaker wishes, which we'll go over as well. HIPAA. This is more of a medical term, but when you actually look at what the definition of HIPAA is, it talks about health information and personal health information. Well, these work groups a lot of times have personal information that's shared. Does that ever cross the line? I don't really know if it does or if it ever will. It's just something I think that's important to consider. And I don't know that it will ever go that way, but it's just something to think about. There is HIPAA training. When I was in medical and pharmaceutical sales, we had to go through HIPAA training. We had to do a lot of training and online, and so there are places and ways online to become HIPAA trained. It doesn't cost that much. But people that work in hospitals, or they are around patients and are privileged to member or to patient information, have to go through this in order to be allowed to do their job. So does it apply to support groups? Does it apply to nonprofit? I think the argument is there. Will it become a deal? I don't know. Where can you get HIPAA training? I'm happy to provide. There's different resources. They also do there's a lot of different kind of medical type training that you can get of just trying to understand the bigger picture of the medical world, which all this information is actually very useful in terms of understanding Medicare, Medicaid, all these things that we might not personally understand because it might not be our case, but it helps us provide and be a resource for our members. Responsible advocacy and patient leaders. We talked a lot about advocacy. We talked a lot about leaders. I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to bring up, why this is important again, and things to consider that maybe haven't been brought up today. Again, what is a patient advocate? What are your thoughts on it after today? We had a great advocacy presentation by Amanda. So in terms of what we define as advocacy is different, and it might have changed today versus what you thought yesterday. And I can tell you from a public health perspective, what I thought of as advocacy is totally different than all the ways we can define it today. So the gray area of patient advocacy, Amanda went over that. And I mentioned her presentation. I mentioned the board certified patient advocacy certification. This is something that's new and it's evolving. It is usually based upon your experience and education to be grandfathered in to take this. Now that's changing and evolving, but this is, I'll just make the caveat, it's an evolving kind of world in this terms of needing professional advocacy. Again, with my education, the professional advocates were usually just in hospitals, but now there's private advocates and there's clearly a need. So how do we define who's qualified to do that? And how, as a person who might want to hire somebody, how do you check their credentials and their education? Because doing a weekend workshop isn't enough. So, but there are those schools, whatever you want to call them, that do provide these certifications that look really, really valid. But in this world that we're kind of in this gray area, I think that this will eventually evolve, and we'll have to really find out what those reputable certification organizations really are and not. So there's just a lot of gray area, and just be, like we talked about where to get your information and medical information, it's the same for these certifications. And I made the one leap talking about, again, legal considerations and insurance needs in terms of if you're doing advocacy, which we'll go into a little bit more detail in terms of the type of insurance, but other possible related industry community health issues. So we talked about advocacy, but it's also health coaching, big thing. And some of these have been really trying to health coach in terms of chronic illness. I'm not saying who needs to be a health coach or doesn't, or who's not qualified. I'm just saying this is different gray areas to consider. And like somebody else has brought up today, people that are like giving medical advice to people, and then people have ended up injured. You have to really think about the qualifications and the certifications and education behind that, but be able to check their credentials and where they got it from, and are they really qualified? This, again, is just a big area that's being evolved. All right, so here's another one that I feel very strongly about in terms of working with providers. We have to think about this. If you're running a support group, you're going to be working with providers. Our providers, the ones that work and specialize in our community, like I said, they devote their careers and their time and their energy to helping us. And we want to help them help us. We want to protect them. We want to foster them. We want to foster collaborative patient-provider dynamics. And it's our job, again, whatever your title is, to lead by example and to make sure that those ground rules also include the way that we share our experiences with providers, protect providers, and appreciate the providers that are working with us. So a few things I talked about is doctor referral lists. A lot of groups have this. There's a big issue with publishing this online. So doctor referral lists, a lot of times, shouldn't be posted online publicly, and even sharing it to your whole support group list sometimes can be an issue. You can collect the names, and I won't go into all the reasons why, but maybe collecting the names and then providing that as needed or in a private group. I don't know exactly the best way, but I know that this becomes an issue because some of these doctors don't want to be on the list. Have we asked them to be on the list? The referral lists are coming from patients based upon their experience, which is great, but we didn't ask that provider, right? So, and then do you want to start asking those providers? Because that's a lot of upkeep too, to get their permission like yearly. So doctor referral lists are really big. Speaker agreements. If you have a speaker coming to the group, just like we're here today with speakers, do you need to have some kind of an agreement for them to understand, what they want and their permissions for their recording to be public or not, or their slides? Not all providers want their slides posted publicly online. A lot of times that has what they call IP, their intellectual property. And that's so critical to make sure that we respect. We have to respect the preferences of our providers that are devoting their time to helping us, because who knows what else is going on in the world? They're humans, they have family, they have career considerations, they have different things, and maybe they want to give this presentation again, and if it's posted online, somebody can just see it and it's not new to that next time that they're presenting it. So, or even medical information, like your report of your appointment, posting that publicly online, that if the next patient sees all that, then it's like not new when they're in with the doctor. So it's just different things to consider. Presentation recordings and slides, limitations on Q&A. If a doctor comes in and they're giving a presentation, and let's say you are recording it, and they say it's okay, you can publish their slides, they give you permission for the recording, but usually there's a Q&A. Well, does that Q&A and patients asking questions, is that recorded? Do you take that off? And also think about the names that you're using. Are people using their names? What questions are providers comfortable with or not? That's also very important because we've talked a lot about personal information and medical advice and governed by malpractice laws and different things that we really truly don't fully understand because we're not providers, but we need to respect that. Limitation on communication, we talked about that, non-disclosures. Is a non-disclosure appropriate? Sometimes it is, especially if you are governed by a nonprofit or you're affiliated, or maybe there's support group pertinent information and you don't want it just shared in, everywhere. I don't know. It's just something to consider. Providing member education, discussions, resources, and fostering positive, collaborative patient-provider relationships. I already talked about that. This is inside and outside the exam room, and it can really be started and fostered with support groups and education, I truly believe, because we need to help patients understand how to help themselves, but also like how to deal with the anxiety and the trauma that comes up a lot of times when we're meeting with providers and going to so many appointments. There's just a lot that we all have in terms of baggage and trauma, and it's real, and there are providers that want to help us, so we want to help provide and foster that really professional relationship and set the caliber high, because that will help us in the long run in terms of understanding EDS, related conditions, and those other providers and adding them who want to help us. Opinions, personal experiences on social media, doctor bashing, again, goes with what I was just saying about the implications of what that means. So not only are we wanting to establish professional conduct and setting the caliber high and helping our members understand how to foster their own relationships, what are the implications of behaviors that are not so great? There are legal and personal and liability issues that are very true and have happened online with opinions and how things are done, and you could be held liable for defamation of character. So let's be very protective of that and help our members understand these implications that they just might not really fully understand. They're just not in that world, but helping them just understand how to just appropriately share their information and what the implications are, and again, fostering this relationship is so critical. All right, so insurance and legalities. So we already talked about this. Support group venue require insurance. It may or may not. But if they don't require insurance, do you still need insurance as a support group leader? You might. You might need something called general liability or social services. Will you need insurance for support group related events? Say you have your support group, but you want to run a 5K. A lot of times, if you're going to get approval for a 5K or some kind of fundraiser, you're going to need to prove or provide insurance for that event. That the venue will have their own insurance, but you need to provide your own insurance that kind of insures them, essentially. So I won't get into the nitty-gritty, but that's essentially really important. So you might not need it for your support group, but in order to do a fundraising event for whatever reason, you might need event-specific insurance information. That's actually come up recently. I've been asked about that a lot. There are insurance providers that focus specifically on nonprofits and support groups and charitable organizations. So there are really great resources for looking at this insurance, the bigger picture, and also different types, and people that you can talk to just find information. And I'm going to share resources if you want to give a link. There's a lot of different companies that you can use, and just to get information and find out how much it costs. Do you personally need insurance? So there's different types of insurances, which should be in another slide. But personally, it's called professional liability insurance. For doctors, it's called malpractice. For publishing, it's called omissions and errors. It's called a lot of different things, but that's your personal or professional liability in terms of your scope of practice or scope of work. So I know Amanda touched on that. A lot of people touched on you're staying within your scope of work, not providing information. You're not a medical provider, but you might personally need insurance just for yourself and your professional liability as a support, as a leader. What type of policies could you need? I mentioned a few of them. There's professional liability, there's general liability, there's social services, there's volunteer, there's auto. There's all these different types of policies. I don't know that all of them apply, but they may. What are the possible risks, issues, and why when you might need insurance? What are the average costs? Average costs, it really depends. it can be anything from like $25 a month for whatever it is to $200 or more. It depends. If the companies that provide insurance for nonprofits or social groups or social services really, in my opinion, and have been the best way to go, because they obviously understand that there's not a whole lot of money involved. So you can get pretty comprehensive insurance in covering a lot of different areas and allow you to do a lot of the different things. And they also cover your speakers for coming. You know, it does the professional liability with social services insurance, both types. If you're not a group, a lot of times does help provide protection for your volunteers and your providers too. So, but it can be, you know, really reasonable. And that also depends on the size and whatever your group is doing. So it's just all really dependent. Legal documents that you might need to have or have on hand or provide. Again, confidentiality and privacy, participant agreement, photo of permission. I have templates for all of these things. I don't know where it's going to be pertinent to you. A lot of times these are governed by state, but I have templates just to share, and I'm happy to provide those as resources, and we'll put them online, and you guys can take a look at it as long as you understand that each state is different. So, liability waivers for your members, non-disclosure and agreements like speaker or partnerships. Maybe you're partnering with, you know, an organization, a nonprofit affiliation, another community resource like Backpack Health or something. Do you need an agreement? What about a conflict of interest statement? So these are all different documents. It seems like a lot, but they are different, and I don't know that they'll all apply, but I'm happy to provide the templates. And then at least you have them as a resource. Again, this type of insurance, this is a really important slide because it seems like a lot, but different types of insurances cover different issues or different possibilities or different risks. So there's general, there's professional, there's social services, there's errors and omissions. Like I said, sometimes in the publishing world, that is your professional liability insurance. Publishing and media insurance, like there is insurance that covers like social media stuff specifically. Now, sometimes that does overlap and it is included under other types of insurance based upon the work that you do or your business essentially. But again, it can be separate. And that's important because when the social media world was really growing and there could be issues that arise, and there are issues, as we all said, and I've been through issues, that's a really big gray area. So you might have all these different areas, but your insurance doesn't cover anything that happens on media, but then you go to a lawyer and you have an issue and somebody's, you know, caused defamation of character on Facebook, they don't know how to handle that. It's like a kind of an issue that is kind of evolving, and there might be a specific social media type insurance that might be more applicable for you if you're mostly on social media and that's the type of group you run. You might want to consider that specifically. I don't know. Directors and operators is usually associated with nonprofits for the members or for the board of directors. But if your support group ends up becoming an organization or you have a team, that's kind of where this would apply. It's just specifically to the leadership team. Volunteer insurance, auto, business owner is more of a global thing. Anything else? So the definition, social services professional coverage for omissions and errors. There is social services coverage. Social services professional coverage is for errors and omissions that could arise in the course of carrying out the missions, providing counseling, advice and support groups, and so forth. So I took that from, I have all my citations at the end, and that's important because this is kind of the more insurance, in my opinion, that really applies to support groups, unless you're doing event-specific stuff that might be a little bit different. Why insurance might be a good idea. So this is I love this quote. Insurance isn't sexy. It's not exciting. It's not the best thing, you know. And a lot of times we don't want to even think about this, or we don't want to have to think about this, and why are we going to think about this, and I never thought about this, and this is really overwhelming. But it is essential, and it's essentially the roof over your head. And in these times, the times are tight, it can be tempting to make insurance a low priority, especially when you're just trying to help. And I mean, again, we only have limited resources and spoons and money, and you know, this might seem like something to not think about or isn't needed because what's really going to happen? I can't give you the right answer. Everybody can make their own decisions, but this statement is very valid. A lot of times it's tempting to make it a low priority, but the strategy can be penny-wise and a pound-full of foolish. This came from avocado.com. Because a lot of times what happens, especially in the service world, nonprofit world, we think about these things after the fact. because we're just trying to help, and you think that nothing's going to happen in the community that we're helping or serving, or nobody's going to have any issues with us, and they're my friends, and I work with them, and we're all just trying to row the same way. Well, things happen. As been stated over and over today, things happen, and we don't want to think about it, but a lot of times when these things come up and the importance of insurance comes up is when something happens, and we're like, oh, wow. So it's just my thought to be, why not think about it a little bit up front? You can make your own choice. Maybe do some research, but just go ahead and just at least with a little bit more information and awareness of kind of the bigger picture, and just consider it and what might be the best approach for you now, then maybe reassess it later and then reassess it later. Just being awareness is a huge key thing so that you're not caught off guard. Because again, we only have so many limited resources and funding and time and energy, and this work is important, it's critical, it's awesome, but it's also very tiring, and the last thing we want is to put our personal financial health at risk. So if you can continue to protect that in whatever way to make sure that you have protection for everybody involved is really key. Importance of establishing barriers in self-care. This again goes to everything that everybody's been talking about, and again to why this is all important too, because thinking about this stuff a little bit up front is self-care, in my opinion, because eventually you're going to get tired, and eventually the money you might run out, or the donations, or the contributions, or the people that are donating their time that helps you keep going. And if you're the leader and you don't have that team, it all can fall on you, and that can be really, really stressful as a support group leader, or if you're running a nonprofit. It's tiring, and how are you going to keep going? And self-care is so critical. So self-care, in my opinion, and again, coming from the public health world, includes the seven pillars of wellness, which includes environmental, occupational, social, emotional, physical, intellectual, and spiritual. So establishing the barriers in communication for support group work is how will you be contacted? When? I'm not going to reiterate that, but people have brought that up, because you will be contacted all the time. And establishing the ground rules up front and expectations is key, because once you start just answering all the time and on the weekends and all these things, well then that's a really hard thing to reel in. I know personally, one of the things I had to stop doing, and it really was hard for me, was phone calls. I can't talk to people on the phone. Very limited, because it's not that I don't want to, but it's because it ends up taking hours of time that I don't have in terms of energy, or because when I'm running a nonprofit, there's not a whole lot of help. You know, you're one-man marching band a lot of times. So that time is taken away from my family, taken away from my work, and then ends up really accumulating at the end on me physically that I just can't keep up. And one of the things that I'm trying to work on is my processes in terms of responsiveness in emails, and getting back to people and doing what I say I'm going to do in a reasonable amount of time. It's not that I ever forget, but you can get just really, really bogged down. So the phone calls for me have been really hard, because it just it causes everything else to just get really delayed. So I've had to really limit that, which was hard. It was also very much energy-wise. I had to set that barrier, because it was just very hard for me to manage my own energy with the phone calls. I don't know why, it just really affected me. So that's just something that I had to do. And everybody's different, but I found that it just really impacted my other work that I was still trying to struggle and work on. And everybody's got to come to their own conclusions and figure out what works best for them. When will you be available to speak via phone? Again, goes back to my point. Will you ever be available? Will you ever take a phone call? Can people call you? Again, goes back to how are you going to be contacted? Do you want to be contacted by the phone? Do you want to always have text messages? There's also been times where, like, I'm having dinner with my family, and one of the things that my family has done, and I credit to my husband, is that we eat dinner as a family almost every single night. We sit down. I actually sit on the floor. I won't go into that. We sit on the floor because you move more joints and bones and muscles to get to the floor and get up. And every little movement helps, especially when you're hypermobile. So we sit on the floor, sometimes on cushions, and there's no phones and anything. Big, big rule. And but there are times where I have to, like, I'm in the middle of something, or I've looked at things, and all of a sudden I'm into a barrage of text messages. So Maria talked about how, like, if you just look at it, all of a sudden you're caught up into the social media group world when you're running a group on Facebook. But for me, I all of a sudden get a whole lot of text messages, and I'm like, it all of a sudden is urgent, or it's somebody in an email, or I didn't answer somebody, or it's a provider or something. And I've had countless times where my husband or my kids will look at me and be like, really? Really? With the phone? Really? Is it that urgent? If you hadn't looked at it, you wouldn't even know. And they're right. Because in our world, everything can feel urgent, everything can feel important, and if you don't establish those barriers, it affects the things that are so important in the long run. When I die, my headstone isn't going to say, oh, thank you for everything that you've given to the EDS world. It's going to say I was a good mom, a wife, a sister, a friend, and maybe that I gave time. But ultimately, what does matter really? I want what my kids are going to leave with. I don't want them to feel like, oh, mommy was constantly bombarded with the EDS world. That's a barrier that is so critical and has personally been a challenge for me. And something that I've had to really come to terms with. How am I going to do this when I don't have a lot of help? And now I have this organization, and where am I going to get the funding? And I don't, now my husband's looking at me going, we can't keep continuing to support this because, again, we're not being paid. Even as a nonprofit group leader, there's no payment. There's no even, it's just trying to get by. A lot of times when you're a young group, and this still applies to support groups too, you're just trying to meet your needs and provide the resources, whether it's printing, insurance, your website space, whatever it is, even just a little bit adds up. And if the pinch comes, and you have to provide, food for your kids, or you've just given so much, you've got family and friends to answer to. You are more than what you do in this community. And that's important for all of us to understand and fulfill and facilitate as well, and have that boundary and identity outside of it. And it can be really hard to reel it back, and you can also get into really tough situations where we've also talked about trauma and issues with our family and family not understanding. So it can be kind of therapeutic to get really involved and do this work. I found it very therapeutic based upon my own personal experience as a kid dealing with EDS and my family not understanding, but then it can also then sacrifice my immediate family, my kids, my husband, that really do understand, and they're trying their hardest to foster this and help. But at some point, you got to know your barrier. So again, on my headstone, I want to make sure that I leave with a good feeling for everybody, including my kids. I don't want them to feel resentful or learn resentment for this type of work. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to foster them to understand the importance of it, and that it's not all about money. It's about giving back, and it's about serving people and finding, glory in many other ways that the public might not understand, but it's so important inside. But I also don't want them to feel resentment. I want them to be proud and have self-efficacy and know that whatever they want to do, they can do it, and they can facilitate it, and they can gain so much more than just what they earn. All right, and are you going to be available for other help? Somebody talked about this too, is that where are your barriers, and are you going to be available to take people to the doctors, to come visit them in the hospital, to provide them money because all of a sudden they have to have surgery and they can't afford it and they're going to die? And I don't mean that lightly, but it's the truth. And of course we want to help everybody, and we suffer ourselves, and there are real crises. I call it the EDS spiral. That happens, and it's true, and it's real, and it's valid. But if we're not careful, we can find ourselves spiraling at the same time we're trying to prevent it in others. And that has also been essentially critical for me too. Here I'm talking about wellness and movement and all this stuff, but I was doing so much less while trying to tell people not to do that. And that's a hard reality to face and look at yourself in the mirror. So knowing those barriers and where your limitations are on the type of help that you're going to provide, and also knowing, like, if you start doing it for one person, are they going to continue asking for it? Or you start doing it for everybody else? Is your leadership team now going to be involved? Maybe they don't want to. Maybe they can't. Just knowing what type of help you're going to provide, and that you physically, emotionally can handle. And again, respecting those barriers that hopefully you've established is really key. Because once you start kind of sliding away from your barriers, then it'll just all be all-consuming, and forget about it. Prioritizing self-care, again, is paramount from the very, very beginning. I mentioned the 7 pillars of wellness, which is something we use in public health, but it really is important. It talks about all of these different things and why it's so important. It's not just about whether you got your PT today or your exercise or your nutrition. It's so much more. Wellness, living well, self-care involves so much. And this work can be very emotionally and mentally draining, and spiritually in some ways, if you feel like, you don't know how to keep going or people aren't helping, it can be very spiritually draining. And it can also be very spiritually uplifting. So it's kind of equal. There are pros and cons, but just understanding that wellness and self-care also includes making sure that you're fostering your health in all of those areas. And identifying the risks or the triggers or the issues that are coming up that are impacting that is important. Like I said, the phone calls for me was just something that really just weighed on me emotionally, and I had to identify why. It was an energy thing, and it was also I just was already struggling to keep up, and it just put me further behind. Rules and processes in place from the beginning. This goes to your ground rules and your processes for, we talked about ground rules and your rules and professional conduct, but also your processes for responding to things easily. I can tell you, I am literally legally blind. I see pretty much out of one eye. My text on my phone is huge. I can't drive at night anymore. And one of the things that I've had to do that's been a huge struggle has been I have to be able to, in order for my processes in place to be more efficient in how I answer things and then not having things weigh over me, is that there's certain things I can't do on my phone because I can't see all the text in one way for me to watch it. So I had to do some things from my computer. I don't like sitting at my computer all the time. It hurts. I hate sitting all day long. It really is one of the biggest triggers for pain. So I do prefer to sit on the floor. I don't have a desk, but even when I'm sitting, I'm constantly moving and everything. But the work on my computer affects my neck, affects hypermobility, but that's how sometimes I can see best, especially if I have to write an email that's more in detailed or I have to provide resources or links. It's kind of like a tracking thing with my brain and not causing a headache. And so there's certain things I couldn't do on my phone. And I had to find a way to be able to do that process and efficiently and do that work that was computer work, but on my phone easily so that it was just not weighing on me and it didn't cause my health to suffer. I still am working on it. It's still a journey. I don't still know all the answers. I just know that I'm constantly working to be more effective and in my terms of my work and responsiveness, but also then not taxing my personal resources or my family's resources in any way. So maximizing your work with the least amount of tiring, if you will, on yourself. Just knowing how to weigh that is really important. So processes is, I mean your workflow. And this goes also with your leadership team and making sure that they're in part of your process too. And can you depend on them? Because if one part of your leadership team or your process that's so critical for doing something that's so important falls through the cracks, it can just totally cut you off guard. And you just all of a sudden just now go from a place of being more efficient and feeling good and managing things to just spiraling again. All right, so I've started a research group, I hear all this information. What do I do now? You talked about legalities, you talked about insurance, what do we do? So step back and review the information. What is pertinent to you? What's pertinent to your group? What's pertinent to what you want to do in the long run and where you want to go and what you might need? Maybe you didn't think about certain needs in the beginning, but maybe you need to think about it now. Assess personal and professional need for insurance, like I said. Establish clear standards for how a support group will run. Reevaluate your privacy and confidentiality considerations. It goes back to, do you need documents, do you not? How do you store that? What are your member preferences? Also goes to speaker stuff. How's your support group team? Do you need to rebuild it? Or do you need to actually build a team because you just can't do it all alone anymore? And what are you going to do if they're not there? That's a really hard situation to be in. You want to serve, people are depending upon you, you like the work that you do, but you don't have the team to help you. So do you stop your support group or not? And can be a really hard, or your nonprofit, that can be a really hard emotional decision, like Maria was saying, of when you have to cut somebody out. So just things to consider. Referral network for members, support group forms and documents we talked about, foster collaborative patient-provider relationships, think about that. Focus on the positive, member empowerment, self-efficacy, we've talked a lot about that today. Understand that it's a journey, that a lot of things evolve. A lot of things we might have said today or I talked about don't pertain to you right now, but maybe they will. And that it's okay. You just can reevaluate kind of what your needs and where you are at a certain situation, and that really is a journey. I'm still in my journey. I'm still trying to figure it out. I know all this information just because this is just my approach to different things in life and business. and it's protected me and then some in the work that I do, but I'm still learning. I'm still going through my journey. And know when it might be important to consider setting up a more formal organization. If your support group grows so big and you're doing fundraisers and you're handling money and you've got like all this member information, it might be in your best interest to consider, I'm not saying necessarily a nonprofit, but there are other business structures that provide kind of a protection. It is more work in terms of thinking of business, but you're already kind of operating as a business and in some ways, and it just provides you protection in terms of if there's an issue, you're not directly implicated, that you kind of have a bigger, broader structure above you that might help provide protection. At the end of the day, anybody can do whatever they want, and you can get, somebody can get really mad and decide they're going to just make things awful for you at any time. Nothing's going to ever really stop that. This is all just to help you just kind of think about things to think about and to just protect yourself with awareness as much as possible. And maybe at some point, your support group is better to be operated under a more organized business structure. And there are different types. Like I said, it doesn't have to always be a nonprofit, because there's more implications to going to that too. But it might be protective for you and your leaders, in addition to insurance. And also sometimes insurance requires you to be an organized or incorporated organization. Not always, but it may. Sometimes there are benefits to actually being incorporated. So you started a support group, but you want to go nonprofit? What do you want to do now? So we don't have a whole lot of time, and I'm going to have these slides on the Lead EDS site as a real resource, but there are people that want to start a nonprofit. I hear it all the time. They want to start a nonprofit. And I don't think that people really, the intent is good, but they don't realize there's just a lot more that goes into that. And not everybody's going to start throwing you donations. Not everybody's going to want to help you. And again, the overlaps for a support group are similar. So, okay, so you want to go support group and you're grown and you do want to be nonprofit. Well, why? What are the benefits to being a nonprofit? Think about your why. Why do you want to be a nonprofit? Why do you want to go nonprofit? This is very important because I don't think a lot of people ever really consider this fully other than they just want to help. But are there ways to help without having the governing and restrictions of the bigger thing in terms of annual reports, all these things that nonprofits have to do to maintain being an active nonprofit with transparency? There's legalities that we have to provide on our websites. I have to constantly update GuideStar, my annual reports, my IRS, my state, all these things. And it can be very tiring, especially if you think that nobody's really paying attention or cares, but it is important. But it is extra work. And you don't have, you should be having a board. And there's different things to think about. So can you do the work that you want to do under a different structure? Again, does your why meet the community's needs? Your why of going nonprofit and what you think you want to do and what's important might not meet the needs of the community. It might not be what's needed. And sometimes that's hard too. I always felt like I might think something's important, but if it's not important to those I'm serving, then there's no point to do it. Really. I'm not in this for glory or money. I'm in it to help. And if what I think is important isn't helping, well, there's no reason. I'm okay not doing it, So just understanding that is your why really meeting the needs of the community. Sometimes it doesn't, or maybe it's not enough. Conduct a community assessment or determine if your why really matches their needs. In public health, we call it a needs assessment. But in simple terms, you can just ask a few of your friends on Facebook. A few of your community friends, hey, what do you think about this? I'm thinking about this. This is what kind of nonprofit. And again, nonprofit is a business. You have to have a business plan, a strategy, a funding thing. It's a whole thing. And you have to have the profit or the money in order to sustain and stay above the red and keep doing the work that you want to do. So there's a lot more that comes in terms of it from a bigger business perspective. That's why I say, what's your why? Can you still do what you want under a different organization structure? There are different organizations. There's one called a B Corp, which is kind of like a social services organization. So they're not a nonprofit, but they're for the social good. One of them is Kickstarter, is a social good organization. So there are kind of hybrid business structures that allow you to still do what you're doing, but maybe not have the same requirements that is required by a 501c3. Now, I will say there are different types of nonprofits, too. Not all nonprofits are 501c3. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll go through consider charitable organization structures. Remember that nonprofits are still a business. I'm not going to go through all this. We've touched a lot about this, but this information will, and key best steps to starting an organization, in my opinion, from my experience, it will be available if you want it. This is just the different business steps that you can take. And here's the different types of nonprofit organizations. Like I said, not everybody is a 501c3 or needs to be. And this is different nonprofit organizations recognized by the IRS, and then states have different requirements too, because you actually incorporate in your state. So this is more information will be on the website if you want to look it up. Social advocacy versus 501c3, we won't go over that, but there are different types. You might need to be a social advocacy nonprofit. Types of nonprofit organizations, we just went over that. The average cost to incorporate in the state first, because that's always your first step for whatever kind of organization or corporation you want to start, is about $200. There are always costs. There are costs. Not all nonprofit stuff is free, or there's an inherent cost that still costs money to going nonprofit and upkeep of any kind of business, just like a support group. Mo money and no taxes when giving back. No, that is wrong. Here's the thing that's really important, and this is probably the most important thing I can say at the end, other than this will be available, is that tax laws change. Understanding that saying that 100% of your donation is tax deductible is incorrect and not factual. The truth of the matter is, for anybody to be able to write off donations, they have to meet different criteria according to their taxes, their income, and whether or not they do personal deductions or they take the standard deduction. There was a different change in the rule in 2018, which changed that. If somebody chooses personal deduction versus doing personal itemizations, they take the standard deduction, they take the standard deduction versus doing personal deductions and itemizations, like many of us do if they have our own business. The standard deduction, whatever you contribute, you can't deduct it. And then if you do personally itemize, you're limited. So I'm not a tax advisor, and again, we are not tax advisors, so it's not our job and role or responsibility to give tax advice or financial advice. They need to seek the expertise of a professional, because it depends on the personal situation, the income, and where they fall in taxes. This just gives you more information on the tax law and how that changed. Donations other than in kind also can be donated, but there's a certain level and restriction of what somebody who can actually take the deduction can take. Deduction percentages only apply to donors who itemize their personal taxes. All donations in kind and cash must be made prior to the end of the year, meaning like you don't have until like March 15th of next year, like in 401ks, if you took something out, you can pay it back by a certain time. All donations, cash or in kind, have to be made by the end of the fiscal year for them to be counted on that year's tax deduction. Some people don't understand that. But again, that's not our job to give those people this information. That's why it's incorrect and not factual for us to say 100% of their donation is tax deductible. It's also not necessarily factual to say 100% of the donations that we receive are all going to just research for the cure. There are inherent costs. We've already talked about that. A lot of people that don't understand this world of the business side don't understand the inherent costs that are real. Somebody's got to pay for them. This is just about the tax changes. Again, it will be on the site. The bottom line, I just went through all of that. This just gives you a couple examples of you have to provide a receipt, and there's certain requirements that you are required to state publicly on your website and also on your receipt when you are giving a receipt for contributions, in kind or cash. If you are a nonprofit, but again, if you're a support group, you're not necessarily allowed or governed by this, but then some people think because they are a support group or that they're giving to a support group that they can write it off. And that was a lot in a lot of the articles I was reading, just to make sure I had proper citations for everybody, that some people take this receipt to their tax advisor and you can't deduct it. So again, it's not our role. And that's pretty much it. And don't give up. The business side of giving back is really critical. Support groups don't necessarily need to become a nonprofit, but understand the pros and cons, and when it's important to think about the bigger picture is important. Not all information in this presentation is pertinent to you or your group, or may not ever be, but it may be later, who knows. Use common sense when doing and caution doing your activities. Start slowly and get established first. Have fun helping your members. Use the opportunity to learn, grow, expand your business sense, and lead outside of your support group as well. You have an incredible opportunity to take this information and learn and go outside and use it, maybe in ways you never knew. There's a resource, and the opportunities and rewards for giving back are endless. There you go.